Nyron never expected his life to turn into a nightmare overnight. One evening, as he walked down the quiet, dimly lit street toward his apartment, he felt a chill creeping down his spine, a feeling that was quickly justified as a sleek black car pulled up beside him. Before he could react, two men dressed in dark suits emerged, grabbed him, and swiftly blindfolded him. Bound and gagged, he could feel the car's engine hum as they drove into the night. The car ride seemed endless, and Nyron's mind raced as he struggled against the binds. His thoughts were consumed by fear and confusion. Why him? What could they possibly want with a struggling artist like him? Then, a dark possibility loomed in his mind. His brother, who had recently vanished without a trace, had always had a knack for getting into trouble. Was he being used as a pawn in some twisted game? When they finally arrived, Nyron was pulled out of the car and ushered through a series of grand, echoing halls. The blindfold was yanked off, and he found himself in a lavish, dimly lit room decorated in dark woods and marbles. Every detail was extravagant, but it felt cold and unwelcoming, amplifying the dread already curling in his chest. Nyron was left alone for only a few moments before the heavy doors swung open, revealing a man with an aura so intimidating that Nyron froze. Feu, the infamous mafia leader, entered the room with an unnerving calmness, his gaze unwavering as he assessed Nyron. Feu's dark eyes held an intensity that seemed to pierce straight through him, and his every movement spoke of control and precision. Feu didn't bother with introductions. In a low, commanding voice, he told Nyron that his brother had disappeared with a large amount of money that belonged to him. Since his brother had failed to return it, Nyron would remain as collateral until he showed up. The words made Nyron's stomach twist in a mix of anger and fear, but he held his ground, refusing to crumble under the mafia leader's icy gaze. "You've got the wrong guy." "I don't know where my brother is," Nyron spat, attempting to maintain a defiant tone. Feu's expression barely flickered. "That's not my problem. Until your brother shows up, you're not going anywhere." Left alone, Nyron paced the room, grappling with his feelings of helplessness and fury. He cursed his brother under his breath, thinking of every possible way to escape from this nightmare. Later that night, he found a small piece of broken jewelry on the floor and managed to pick the lock on his door, sneaking out into the darkened corridors. He moved as quietly as he could, heart pounding, but just as he thought he was free, he felt a heavy hand grab his shoulder. He turned to see the Nam, Feu's right-hand man, staring down at him with a look of mild amusement. "Going somewhere?" Nyron tried to struggle, but Thanum's grip was like iron. Without a word, the Nam dragged him back to his room, locking the door once more. "You'll need to learn the rules," he said simply before leaving Nyron alone, his hope of escape crushed. The next morning, Nyron was startled when a young man with a warm, friendly smile entered the room. Cheo, Feu's younger brother, introduced himself cheerfully, explaining that he'd heard about Nyron's stage and wanted to check on him. Cheo's easygoing demeanor was such a contrast to the cold intensity of Feu that it threw Nyron off. Despite his distrust, Nyron couldn't help but feel at ease with Cheo, whose warmth and kindness were a welcome relief. Cheo, sensing Nyron's discomfort, did his best to reassure him, cracking jokes and telling him that not everyone in the mansion was as terrifying as Feu. Though Nyron didn't fully trust Cheo, he found himself smiling for the first time since his kidnapping. There was something genuine about Cheo's friendship that he couldn't ignore. But Nyron's respite was short-lived. Feu soon ordered him to take on small tasks around the estate, tasks meant to keep him under surveillance while testing his obedience. Under Thanum's strict supervision, Nyron complied, but not without showing his disdain. Each task felt humiliating, and his quiet resentment was palpable. Yet, something in Feu's gaze hinted at a growing interest, as though Nyron's fierce independence had piqued his curiosity. Throughout the day, Cheo would find ways to check in on Nyron, making small talk and offering encouragement. Nyron found himself looking forward to these moments, as Cheo's easygoing nature was a bright spot in his captivity. Nyron started noticing how Cheo's presence seemed to irritate the Nam, who remained stern and watchful. One evening, as he carried out another menial chore, Nyron caught sight of Feu, sitting alone in a darkened room. The light was dim, but Feo's profile, softened by shadows, looked almost contemplative. Gone was the stern mask he wore in front of others. Here was a man who, for a fleeting moment, seemed vulnerable. Niren felt a strange pang of empathy, though he quickly shook it off. This was the man who had held him captive, the man who controlled every aspect of his current life. Feo's eyes lifted, catching Niren watching him. For a brief moment, they simply stared at each other, a silent tension passing between them that neither could explain. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, Feo's expression hardened once again, and he rose to his feet, his usual cold demeanor falling back into place. That night, as Niren lay on the unfamiliar bed, his mind raced. He was furious, helpless, and uncertain. Yet, he couldn't deny the strange pull he felt toward Feo. He tried to convince himself it was just a side effect of the situation, an instinctual reaction to the powerful man who controlled his fate. But deep down, he knew there was more to it. Meanwhile, Feo couldn't shake the image of Niren's defiant gaze, the way he stood up to him despite the danger he was in. Niren's fire intrigued him, challenging his need for control and precision. Feo was used to people who feared him, who obeyed without question. But Niren was different, and it unsettled him in a way he hadn't anticipated. As the days went by, the tension between them only grew. Feo found himself watching Niren, seeking him out under the pretense of assigning more tasks or ensuring he wasn't planning another escape. Niren, despite his resentment, began to notice the complexities beneath Feo's cold exterior, a side of him he couldn't fully understand. In a world where trust was scarce and loyalty was often bought or forced, the connection growing between Niren and Feo was fragile and dangerous. And yet, neither could deny the invisible thread binding them together, drawing them into a world of shadows, secrets, and forbidden feelings that neither of them were prepared to face.